let me tell you a bit of a story. I've just returned a couple of weeks ago from Bhutan, and I don't know how much you all know about Bhutan, but a fascinating place that I've always wanted to visit, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. But it was a combined Bhutan Thai International Conference on Lifestyle Medicine and Wellbeing. Essentially, I was in Thimphu in Bhutan, and yeah, and I was so excited to be invited to this because actually it was quite an intimate gathering. There were only 70 delegates invited, and all but myself, and there was one colleague or friend from the United States, and everyone else was either Thai or Bhutanese. So um, we flew into Bangkok, and they actually chartered a flight. So it was hosted by the royal family of Bhutan, and so it was sort of an invitation only thing. Anyway, they chartered a flight from Bangkok to Paro, which is where we landed. Short little diversion to the story. I had noise cancelling headphones on the flight from Bangkok to Bhutan, and I didn't hear them say that we were stopping in India. And so we stopped at Calcutta and the airport there, and I jump off the plane, and then I go over and I'm in immigration line. And I was a bit puzzled that not everyone had been pushing to get off the plane. There was only some of us, and anyway, I was at the front of the immigration line about to step into India officially when someone quickly grabbed my arm and said, "Quick, quick, come with me!" And they dragged me back onto the plane because it was just a stopover. And as I walked on the plane, and just everyone else that's going to the conference is like still sitting there, I thought, not very good. And when I told my wife this story, she's gone, "I'm not surprised." So, anyway, I almost didn't get to Bhutan, but I did. And it was an amazing place. And we're at the conference for a few days, which was actually was the Queen Mother of Bhutan actually came along and opened the conference and made some remarks. And then get this, after it, which this is highly atypical, she said, "Oh, listen, I'm happy to have high tea with a group of people from after the conference on that particular day, and yours truly got chosen." So I got to sit on the little couch. It was in this beautiful little tent thing. There was a couch in front of the Queen Mother, and there was a small group of us. And anyway, I got to actually chat with her and ask questions about the work that they're doing in Bhutan. So it was really cool and I know that you're all thinking, yes, that guy is definitely a high tea kind of guy. And I am. I was very careful to keep my pinky out and all the rest of it. Anyway, it was a great experience. And while we're over there, we also got to they took us on tour and showed us some sites. Bhutan's actually quite a difficult country to travel. And the reason for that is that they almost sort of locked down a little while back. And you have to have a travel guide with you. And so anyway, they took us to see the sites. A couple of the most impressive ones. They have the world's largest seated Buddha. So we got to visit that. And then in the background there, in the other photo, you can actually hike up to the Tiger's Nest Monastery, which is over 3,000 meters elevation, and incredible. The fact that this thing it's essentially just perched on the edge of a cliff. So it was amazing experience to go and visit the place. But the real reason that I was so excited about visiting is that I knew something special about Bhutan, and I'm not sure if you've heard about this, but they were the country that a little while back now actually adopted gross national happiness as their metric for success. So within most countries, we talk about the gross domestic product, GDP, all about economic growth, how it's the country doing. Well, what they realised, and very, very profoundly insightful, I think, on behalf of their king, was actually the fourth king of Bhutan that adopted this. But what they said is that, what, maybe economic growth, maybe GDP isn't the best metric for success for our country. Because what, every time you build a new prison or you sell a new medication, that actually stimulates the economy, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean it's playing into what really matters most. And so what they did is they said, no, no, strategically, what we want to be our guiding principle, what we want to be our true north is actually gross national happiness, right? It's the well-being of our country and of our people that matters most to us. And so they legislated that. So built into their constitution now. And it was officially that the fourth king of Bhutan started talking about this in the 1980s and 90s, but it was 2008 that they actually constituted it, that gross national happiness would be their key metric for success. Interesting, and it has a number of different domains to it. So you can see there, it talks about certainly, health and education is a big part. Education is free to all Bhutanese people. They have a big emphasis on the environment. So, for example, the country it's based at the foothills, the Himalayas, and they've constituted that 60% of the country's land has to remain untouched. So it has to be virgin, forest. There's a big emphasis on culture and the preservation of culture because they've seen, when the West comes into, developing countries, often that can really, influence the way that they do life and they wanted to preserve their culture. Governance, promoting vitality and health, all these things became very front and center. And this picture here is actually the fifth king of Bhutan, who's the son of the fourth king who really set this up. And I tell you what, the fourth king and the fifth king, very, very loved, very popular amongst the people, and very insightful, I think. But the fourth king who established this gross national happiness, throughout his reign, he was actually setting the country up, and they didn't even realize this until it sort of climaxed in 2008. He was actually setting the country up to become a democracy. And so, fascinating that and in 2008 he handed it over and set it up as a constitutional monarchy. So Bhutan is now a democracy, run as a democracy, but they have, their king. At the same time, that fourth king, he was only in his early 50s, height of his popularity, actually stepped down and hand the kingship over to his son, which is now the fifth king. And so once again, very unusual for a king to essentially relinquish power. He even set up a whole lot of really quite insightful things, like, for example, the king has to step down at the age of 65 and hand on to the next. So, yeah, a remarkable country, and chatting with the Queen Mother, literally face to face. Once again, hearing their great interest in the well-being of their people, and how do we promote that, and identifying that, this is what matters most. And I find that a really, really powerful, construct, that asking that question of what matters most. And then what can we do about setting processes in place to go after that goal? Now, what I will say, and I'm going to wrap up in just a moment, but when you look at the world happiness rankings in terms of countries, Bhutan actually doesn't do that great. So it's actually ranked 95th out of about 160 countries in the world. Australia, we typically get around about 10-ish, they're either 10th or 9th or sometimes 11th. So we do quite well. It's always the Scandinavian countries of Finland and Denmark that typically have the top spots. And so you sort of think, oh, well, wait a sec, what's happening here? They've declared gross national happiness as their goal, and yet they're ranked 95th. And look, there are a number of factors that play into that. One of which is that when the surveys are done on the happiest countries in the world, a standard of living plays an important part into that, and it's quite weighted towards that as a metric. So obviously a country like Bhutan, which is growing, only has 800,000 people, quite rural, doesn't have any traffic lights in the whole nation. So even their capital, Thimphu, no traffic lights. So so the standard of living wouldn't be what we would say we experience in the West and some of these developed countries. But you know what? My sense was the people were pretty happy, and certainly as a very safe country, and so I think that ranking sort of belies what really the story that's being told. But, regardless of what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong, what I think, but I do think they're very, powerful leaders in terms of their intentionality around this. I think what it does is helps me to reflect, and I'd love for you to reflect on, that whole idea of what matters most. And to what extent do we actually get intentional about that and actually declare that, and have that front of mind? And I think there's huge power in that. And so, the questions I'd like to ask you, because I think it relates to how we're living our lives, and I think personally asking that question of, what matters most to us? What is it that I'm aiming for here? What am I chasing? And is the way I'm approaching life and living my life, is that representative of that? If someone was to just to observe me and the way I'm living my life, does it sort of testify to, the kind of goal that I really have for myself? And so that's what I think it'd be great to chat about today. So, a couple of questions. Number one, do you think that gross national happiness is a wise choice for a country? Right? Because there are critics of that. Some people say, yeah, it's a bit far-fetched. It's that, they should be really developing and growing more. Although they do have some innovative things happening. They actually have an entire city that they're establishing, called the GMC, which is designed to be world class, but also environmentally friendly and capture that happiness and that mindfulness aspect that they're known for. But do you think that this whole idea of gross national happiness is a wise choice for countries? There's question number one. Secondly, what are you aiming for in life? Now, if you had to identify what matters most to you, what are you aiming for in life? And is how you're living your life representative of that pursuit? And then the last question, what could you do this month to ideally move towards what matters most for you?